So the recording has begun, and welcome again everyone to Digital Badges, Open Badges 101. Today we're really pleased to invite or to welcome our presenter, Megan Cole. She's the Marketing and Community Strategy Lead at the Mozilla Foundation, where she manages their Open Badges brand strategy, the partnerships, the engagement with partners, and the community development. So you can see some more things about Megan here. Megan, welcome again. I have a question for you. How did you get involved with Mozilla? How did you come to them?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And first, I just want to say thank you, everyone, and thank you, Michael. I'm very happy to be here today. I, as you can tell, come from a pretty extensive background in marketing, in which I used to help small businesses ultimately help them maintain and sustain their businesses, but really started to learn about this concept of open badges and really about how the fundamental basis is really helping individuals, to either get jobs or internships and so forth through a personal connection, and really just started to find, just really started to become passionate about it and realize that, through this concept of connected learning, we ultimately can make a change. And so decided to make a shift in my career and start working more towards the nonprofit open source world, and I absolutely love it, which is why I'm here today.
I can tell, we've had a chance to talk, and you really do bring this passion for the things that you do there at Mozilla. All of us think of it as, of course, the only thing we think of is Firefox, and I guess not all of us recognize all of the other things that Mozilla does. So it's our pleasure to have you. I'm going to click forward now and then turn over the presentation to you. So you're now in control, and in a couple of slides, I know you're going to kick it back to me for the polling. So why don't you go ahead?
Great. Absolutely. So, so again, and just to touch on that, so like Michael said, so everybody knows of Mozilla as Firefox, but we also have a foundation entity that's really dedicated towards open source initiatives. And so Open Badges is one of them. In addition, we have an initiative called Webmaker that's really about going around the entire world and teaching people how to use the web and ultimately how to make the web better and so forth. So it's a big reason of why I'm here today. So ultimately, what I'm going to do today is really walk you through some of the fundamental basics. So really, what is a badge, why open badges, details on our what's called OBI, which is our open badges infrastructure, and then take a look at the current status of the ecosystem, more or less. But before we get started, we have a poll.
Al, thank you for turning back to me. So audience, now that Megan's introduced herself to us, let's give her some information about ourselves. So using the polling button in your upper left there, why don't you tell us a little bit about your status? In a sense, number A, you've got a good idea of what badges are and you want to implement them. Or choose B, I use various forms of credentials but not badges yet. Number C, just learning about badges, and D is my little joke slide, Megan. I couldn't resist throwing it in. I might be in the wrong webinar, so hopefully nobody says D at this point. Megan, I'm giving them about another 10 seconds to respond to the poll. You can see most people have responded. So folks, I'm going to count down from 5, and then I'm going to show the results of the poll. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Let's take a look at this. Let me reposition this up here a little bit, Megan. So you can see the majority of our folks are new to this area, but a significant number who are familiar with badges. So you've got a mixed group here. Unfortunately, no one clicked D.
That's great. Glad we're all together for the next hour and know what we're doing.
Okay, very good. So you're go ahead now.
All right. Okay. So thank you. That's really good to know. And so really for those of you that are brand new, we'll take a walk through the basics. And then for those of you that are a little more familiar, I'm going to give some examples of some different companies that are using it and talk about some of our bigger initiatives. So hopefully that will provide some value as well. So really the biggest question, that I really like to kick off is it's really about taking a step back and what are the problems that we need to solve, more or less. And what we really came up with is this concept that education and workforce are really changing. And so there's, just movement with both. There's a disconnect between getting jobs coming out of college. There's this stress on testing, and testing being such a pivotal part even to get funding for school systems. And so really, what you have is all of these things going on where really it's about how do we help the individual learner. And so this is just a good quote that likes to kind of shake up the beginning of the presentation, where it's from the head of HR at Google that's basically saying, GPAs are worthless as criteria for hiring, and test scores are worthless. Your ability to perform at Google is completely unrelated to how you perform when you're in school, because your skills acquired in college are very different. Now, this quote is not meant to say we are not believers in school and GPA by any means, but what it's trying to show you is, being like a company like Google, who probably gets tens of thousands of resumes a day, is they're looking for more. They're looking for more to really capture who that learner is, rather than just a GPA and test scores. So we have, tension between the economic mobility and innovation and access, and I think that, this is apparent across many sectors, not necessarily isolated to education. And so with that, I think it's a good step as we start to dive in, is to take a look at the different sectors, more or less. And so really you have K through 12, and so the current system is broken, so you have dropouts not really ready for college. You have a lot of new approaches being explored, so personalized learning, competency-based, and then, wrong accountability measures and wrong credentials. I brought up the idea of testing before and how important the test scores are, but in reality, tests are only a piece of the puzzle, more or less. And so a good example is Isabel, a 10th grader, struggles with some subjects in school, nets out to average despite doing many things well, involved in many activities, but there's no real way of keeping her falling from behind, more or less. There's no real way to kind of motivate her or show her different, pathways other than just the subjects that are in school. Take a look at it from the teacher perspective as well, where you have Tawa, who's a 7th grade teacher. She must teach to test, and there's little room for innovation or to attend to the individual student's needs. Rather, she is focused on what the test scores and how that's going to reflect on her. So it provides her, there's a lot of barriers and a lot of challenges to really getting to know who those students are. Also, after-school networks. So we have a really strong after-school networks in the United States. And then there ultimately can be really compelling learning environments. And so the challenge is they're not connected to school. And so all of the learning and the opportunities that happen within these avenues don't technically, quote unquote, count for learners, more or less. And so there's not that direct connection. So a good example, Eduardo, who's a 7th grader, he's a below average student in school. He's an emerging technologist and is a mentor in the after school program, but he doesn't see that as legitimate learning, because he thinks that, that's just something he does on his own time, but when he goes back to school and he's not doing as well, he just sees himself as not a good student, more or less. Also higher education and university. So, I think these are, common threads, expensive, inconsistent quality. There's a growing gap between people graduating from college and ultimately being able to get a job. And there's a little bit of a monopoly that's going on for credentials, more or less. And so a good example is Ahmad, who is a recent grad. He brings a transcript to a job interview, and he's surprised that this means little to the employer, that there's no real way for him to demonstrate skills in granular learning, and the employer wants to see more. That him going to Purdue University and getting a degree in physics is nothing differentiating from the other 10 people that did that as well. Also workforce. So workforce is changing. It's not always enough to have a degree. New skills are important. New economies have emerged, and employers can't find the right matches. So there's different overall skills out there now, different roles, and it's just really hard to make the connection. And then there's a lot of adults who are getting on-the-job type of training, but ultimately aren't able to show that off, and so it's hard for them to connect. So 2 examples here as well. Sal, he's a displaced worker, does not know what skills he needs for a new job. University is not an option in his current situation, and he has no way to demonstrate his skills that he has learned while in the workforce. And then you can flip it to Joelle, so you can look at it from both the consumer and the employer perspective, where Joelle is the hiring manager and can't find the right people for the job, has hired the wrong person several times at great cost, and really wants better tools for assessing what candidates can do. Because as much as a resume tells you information about that person, there's this huge trust level of really knowing that what that person puts on that paper is actually valid, more or less. So with that, obviously, through some of those examples, it's kind of clear that there's change that's going on in both the education and workforce environments, and that really no single institution can prepare someone for all of the changes that are going on and really how to adjust to them. So there's this concept of a need for a connected ecosystem of learning. So how do we really connect the dots and really provide credentials that capture and communicate learning skills, more or less. And so think about capturing it as the whole person rather than just more or less from individual pieces. And so that's really where Open Badges comes into play more. So Open Badges is really about reimagining credentials. And before we dive into really a little bit deeper, I think it makes sense to take a step back and say, well, what are badges, more or less? So badges are digital representations of skills or achievement. And so the key part with this is that they're digital and that they also are representative of skill or achievement, so that there's evidence behind it, more or less. And I think badges aren't really new to us. So most of us, as we know, badging was very prevalent in scouting, so Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts, where individuals could receive badges based on the different activities that they ultimately use, and then ultimately they would show them off. There was this level of, they could unlock other badges based on certain skills that they did, and really ultimately show off who they are as the learner, more or less. And so you started to see that more and more the badges represent achievements on the web. So they go from the physical form to the web. And I use Foursquare just as an example because this is an example of a badging system that was created a few years ago that really played off on the social aspect, right? So this wasn't really about necessarily showing off what the individual knows, but it was introducing badging into this concept as an individual would check into places. Ultimately, based on their check-ins, they could earn certain badges. And they also really started to play with the concept of leveling up. So if you unlocked the grocery store badge, if you checked in 10 to 15 times, you could unlock level 2. And so, but what you started to have was that in looking at an individual's badges, you could tell more about that individual. So these were definitely used for more of a fun social status, but you'll see that increasingly badges are starting to get used for more skills, right? And so this is a good example that I like to give. It's a company called Stack Overflow. And really what it is a development, a developer environment, like question and answers form. And so any developer can go and ask anything from a simple question, how to bold something in Node, to what's the latest updates in Java and so forth. And so what they found was they had a really active and engaging user group that you could really start to tell a lot about that person by the responses that they were giving. So you could tell if they answered a lot of Java script questions that there's a high likelihood they knew Java. And if they were engaged a lot, that they were a good team player. And so they created a very simple batch system, very similar to exactly what you see here. But it was really based on the real tasks and real work, more or less. And what they found was that they ended up getting so much data about that individual user that they could really paint that picture of who that individual user was. So they ended up creating a site called Careers.2.0, where really companies like Google and other big sites are actually paying to get access to this information on the engineers because it really is telling who they are, all the skills they know outside of just they went to what college and what did they get, more or less. And so going on, so we just talked about what are badges, so let's talk about why badges. So really badges are about capturing the complete learning path, and really the goal is to build and communicate your reputation and your identity in a way that is evidence-based, granular, and transferable. And so that content, that there's evidence behind what you're doing, but you ultimately can take it with you, so that the beauty is that the badges lie within the learner. And so they really are meant to show off surface skills and competencies that are important to people and give them a way to plug them in so that you can collect the badges for all the skills that represent you, but then ultimately you choose which badges that you would ultimately want to share when you're going to get a job or so forth. So then what we found in doing this, though, and this is a big reason of where open comes into play, is that it's not just about having these siloed badging systems, that really the beauty here is creating more of a badge ecosystem. And so the goal is really not just digital badges, but this concept of open badges. And so that's really what we do at Mozilla, is that this is a good diagram to walk you through, is that you have the learner, and the learner gets badges from multiple areas. So there's multiple issuers. So you have job training, online training, volunteer programs, and all that learner can get all that information from those different issuing organizations. Then the learner has the ability to store and host those badges in their badge backpack. From here, you can click on the badges, and they ultimately would link to the evidence that the issuing organization had set up. From the backpack, the learner has the ability to share for personal network sites, even a digital resume. And then from there, you can share them out for job opportunities, lifelong learning, and unlock new potentials, more or less. So taking a step back and looking at this as a whole, it's the backpack area that really is the Mozilla Open Badge infrastructure. And so what we've done is really create the technology that all of the different issuing organizations can ultimately use within their badge platforms, and then ultimately it allows the learner to hold the badges and push them out to their backpack. So what we have is true to Mozilla style. So we have free and open source softwares in backpacks and APIs. So this is an example of the backpack. For those of you that aren't familiar with what an API is, basically it's just a way that code is written so that there's a two-way type of communication. So if you were to build a badge issuing, or if you were to issue badges on your end, using our API, that information can then be shared out with the individual's backpack, more or less. And so with this, we've also, as we started to dive in, is that a badge, it's really important to define that a badge is more than a badge. And so it's not just a pretty picture. And you'll hear me say that a few times, because a lot of times that's where you get some of the criticism that says, oh, well, I'm just going to have something that looks nice on my profile or something. But the beauty of a badge in a digital badge is that you can link to the evidence and that you can link to criteria, more or less. And so what we've come up with is ultimately the core information that needs to be included with the badge. So that's badge name, description, criteria, issuer, evidence, date, standards, tags. And this is a really good description that was made from a member of our community. But it's all of these information that really makes up the Open Badge standard. So what we did through the foundation is really say that any organization that's going to issue badges needs to define what these ultimately 6 items are. So that we have set that these need to be included, but it's up to the individual issuing organizations to define what these are. And so that's one of the beauties of our infrastructure, is that it's personalized, it's customizable per issuing organization, knowing that we're dealing with issuing organizations across multi-sectors, like I mentioned before. So this is just a quick look, and don't get caught up in reading all the details. We'll make sure you have these slides later so that you can see. But I really just like to call attention to this, because on the left side you'll see issuers, which issuers can be anything from websites, organizations, education providers. And then on the far right side you see displayers, which ultimately can be, again, personal blogs, social networking, resume, more or less. In the middle is really what the ultimate plumbing is. And so that's really where the Mozilla infrastructure is really set. And so issuers can also be displayers, but you can have them one in unique and so forth. But just a quick look at kind of how the organization structure kind of works. So just going on, so we, just to show where we are at, is that about a year ago we had 98 issuers and only 1,000 badges issued, and today we have over 1,500 issuers and over 200,000 badges issued. And basically what I will do is eventually we'll go through and walk you through some of those examples, so some of those issuing companies. But first, I think we're going to take a quick pause to answer a few questions.
Well, Megan, this is Mike. I'm exhausted now after these first 20 minutes. I've struggled to keep pace with you, but I'm fascinated too. And there's a number of questions in the window. But let me tell you something which was like an epiphany for me. I would listen to you say, and so you can click on the badge and link to the credentials. And suddenly that seemed to like change my perception. What exactly does that mean? But maybe it's the credentials that were defined by the issuer. Am I correct?
Yes. Yep. And so that's the beauty of having the digital badge, is that it's got the evidence behind it. So Let's say you had a badge for, I don't know, taking a HTML course or something. And so really within that badge, ultimately if I am the person that's checking the badge of that individual, if I click through, there would be some form of evidence of why that individual got that badge. And so whether that was a link to some work that I had done in HTML, to a code sample, really what that evidence is defined is by the issuing organization. But that's one of the biggest beauties of, if you look at taking a resume, which is a piece of paper and has things written on it. So if a HR director wanted to validate any of that, they either have to call someone and then they have to trust that that person that they call is telling them the right information. Or if you have badges in front of them, ultimately they can click through and see the evidence that's behind it. That's the ultimate goal.
Interesting. Can anyone issue a badge, or do you vet them in someone? You mentioned you have 1,500 issuers.
Yes.
Can anyone, can Mike Lasecki issue a badge?
Mm-hmm. Yep, so the way our open structure has set up is that anyone can issue a badge. Ultimately, in order to issue a badge that is open compliant based on our standards, those 6 items that I listed need to be fulfilled.
Let's go back to those. Do you mind if I go back to those? Those were,
nope.
Yeah, okay, you're taking us back. There they are.
Yep.
There they are.
So you have to be, all of this information has to be ultimately defined, and then it has to be utilizing either one of our APIs or our plugins as a means to ensure that it's open, basically. And there's a ton of different platforms, so badge issuing platforms that have come up that are community built. And whether there's one called Badge OS, there's we recently did one. There's one in the UK called Make Badges. So it's makebadge.es. And so there's a different amount of issuing platforms that are available that people can ultimately go and start to issue badges. In addition, there's WordPress plugins. So a lot of times we have individual teachers, right, that they're trying to do something to engage students within their class. So they will create a WordPress blog and through there be able to issue badges and so forth. So there's different levels based on kind of what you're trying to do. I will say that as an issuer or as an issuing organization, the biggest hurdle to do is really to figure out what you want to badge, more or less. And so the actual technical implementation is not that challenging. It's more or less just defining what it is that really makes up these 6 criteria, and then what it is that you're ultimately trying to get from badging, basically. Does that kind of answer your question?
Interesting. There's a related question in the chat that says, does anyone know if schools are encouraging college-bound students to adapt badges as potentially qualifiers as they apply to colleges? Are colleges recognizing that sort of thing yet?
Yes.
Or maybe it's all changing so quickly,
yes.
obviously.
We are in very much of a rapid-paced environment right now. But yes, to your point, there are I will go through a few examples in a little bit, but there are some after-school networks that are working on badging system that connect with local colleges. Right now, where colleges we see, there's DePaul University in Chicago announced in June of this year that they're starting to work on using badges through the application process, so that college-bound kids can submit their badges with their college applications. And then ultimately they're coming up with systems so that based on certain badges, those students would be able to ultimately skip intro classes. So not only will the badges help them, what would add to their college application, but if they have, gotten certain requirements, they could ultimately skip certain classes. And then also, I'll go through an example about Purdue University. And so they're actually working with badges that are implemented into their graduate classes. So right now, the badging platform, which is called their Passport platform, is aligned right next to the curriculum. So ultimately, the student still goes through the required 12 credits and has the option for electives. But what they found was that there was so much learning going on outside of just the tests, the individual classes, whether it was labs, whether it was internships, that they really wanted to give an opportunity to have that student show that they've been doing that work, but also have the ability for the teacher to see all of the work that the student has been doing. So they're working with badges at that level as well. So those are just two examples. I will say that we're starting to kick off certain pilots. So we've been in talks with some of the community colleges associations to see about how we can work in some pilots as well at the association level. So there's a lot of movement right now, but those are just a few examples of how schools are starting to use it.
Good, and I know you've got some more coming up. We're starting to get flooded with questions in the chat window, but we'll take two more now, and and then we'll allow you to go on.
Sure.
There's somewhat of a technical question. The question is, will we receive a list? But let me rephrase the question.
Yeah.
How do you know how to become an issuing site? Are there guidelines? Does someone tell you need to have these sort of things, platforms, scripts, and so on? How do you get that information?
Yep, that's a great question. So if you visit our site, which is called openbadges.org, you'll find a wealth of information, and what it can do is provide you some of the details on becoming an issue organization and a display organization. It will then link to a little bit more of technical type of specs, so really diving in a little bit deeper of really what does it mean, what does it take you to get set up, and so forth. In addition, to tease a little bit of what we have coming, what I'm doing right now is working on launching a new kind of onboarding setup most likely in January this year called Badge Kit. And what we're doing is we're making sure that we have all the foundational tools that organizations need to kind of get up and operational. And so, we've noticed that there's a big gap of going out and doing presentations like this where people get it, but then really kind of helping them take the next step. And so in January, we're launching this badge kit, which will kind of ultimately be all of the key tools that you need to create a badge system and do it very simply, more or less. So the design piece, so helping you design the badges, the system design piece, so walking you through all the key things you need to think through in order to answer these 6 questions, and then the technical piece, so how can we help you ultimately get up and operational very quickly. But in the meantime, I encourage you to check out the site, openbadges.org, and you'll get links to all of the key resources. In addition, I will just flag one more thing, that being an open source community, we are very community driven. And so what we do is we have certain outreaches, a weekly community call, and also a Google group that's really active of current issuers and displayers, of people sharing best practices, and ultimately there to kind of help people as they go through this process. So at the very end of my presentation, I have links to all of that, just in case people are interested, and we'll make sure that that information is circulated after as well.
Thanks, Megan. We're going to put together a little handout that includes those 4 links on that last slide. Here's the final question for this break period, and I have to admit I was thinking of this one too. If anyone can issue a badge, then there's a zillion badges, and do they become diluted? I'm sure you guys sit around with coffee, you and Chris and your colleagues, and talk about maybe some of these things. What's your sense of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great question, and we also get the question on the lines of, of the spamming aspect. So is somebody going to go and then try to just create all these badges for themselves and spam the system? So it's all things that we're working towards right now. I will say that we are not at a point yet where badges are diluted by any means. Also, the beauty is that the individual learner owns all of the badges. And what I mean by that is ultimately they can decide what they want to show off, right? So let's say you're really active in badging. At this conference I just went to recently for the Mozilla Summit, an engineer within Mozilla came up to me and we were talking about, and he pulled up his backpack, and I think he had about over 200 badges. And I was first amazed at his activity level, but then we had a conversation of, so you have a lot of badges, what do you use? What do you do with them? And he discussed about how he creates ultimately what he wants to show off. So let's say he's going into a job interview for a specific thing, or he's going in, to kind of show off his skill set. Ultimately, he can choose the badges that he wants to show at that, more or less. And so at the individual learners, I think you will always have the option to pick and choose what you want to see, more or less. At the ecosystem level, we're not yet to a point of saturation. It's definitely something that we're talking to. We're looking in different ways to almost create, and I say this very loosely because we're still really piloting and prototyping this, but this concept of coming up with, okay, so if you get badges in this level, those most likely are kind of lower level kind of badges, but when you get levels at, if there are certain badges at higher levels that have more weight, more or less. And so we're playing with different pilots right now, and we're working across all sectors with employers and universities to try to really tackle that. But we're not really at the point yet where it's not a big issue at the moment. So, but we're trying to lay the foundation so that we're ready for it when it is, and Open Badges takes off even further.
Well, good. Thank you. Very thoughtful answer.
Yeah.
You know what? Why don't you go ahead? You're a couple slides back,
okay.
so just advance yourself forward and take us forward.
Okay, great. Okay, so who is using badges and how are they using them? And so the best way I really like to tell this story is going back through the stories. So let's take a look at through all of those stories I told in the beginning, and then I'll give you some real life examples. So first you have Isabel, so she's a 10th grader, struggles with some subjects, nets out to average, and there's no real way of keeping her falling behind. So ultimately for badges, they can reward the granular accomplishments and then strengths in school. And so she can use a combination of the badges to better understand and guide her, and then ultimately could use the badges for college applications. So they kind of help her build confidence in other areas where she's good that might not necessarily be what school defines as being good. Same with the teacher. So again, must teach to test, has no real insight to student interests. So she has the opportunity to issue badges for skills and extra learning in the classroom, can use them from outside school to better understand and guide students, so learn about what people are doing in after-school networks and so forth. But then even also she can use them to make sure that she's up to date with her innovative practices. And so again, technology is changing. The education even teachers get doesn't stop the day that they graduate from school as well. And so she can use badges as a means to show off the skills that she's getting and take them back to her employer and so forth. So a good example of this, there's a school in California called the Corona-Norco school, and basically what they recognized was students were not motivated by A's within their program, and so that they really started to look to badging for coursework skills and attendance. And really each student ultimately gets this passport when they start with the school program that goes through when they graduate from school. And the goal is that once they complete the passport, that it ultimately leads to college acceptance. And so this is just an example of what the passport ultimately looks like. And then you'll see that there's badges not only for the courses that they take, but also for the attendance and the behavior, and then other things that they're involved in outside of just the straight math, science, and so forth. And so they're working right now with the universities in their local area so that a student would be able to use the passport as part of their college application. So that part's still being piloted, but they've seen a lot of initial success to help really promote engagement, more or less, to go through here. The after-school network, and so Eduardo, who's a 7th grader below average in school, he's an emerging technologist, but doesn't realize this is legitimate learning. Badges for his learning outside of school really kind of helps him unlock the potentials, and really he can carry these with him back to school and share interest groups and build reputation. And we have a good example of this called the Providence After School Alliance, where they really worked with local schools and businesses to create a badging platform based on the programs that they offer, and then it connects for local school and college credit at the University of Rhode Island. And actually there was a Google Hangout earlier, White House Google Hangout earlier this year, where a student that went through this program, his name is Brian Norton, and Michael, I'll send you the link of this Hangout because it was actually really engaging, but he actually tells the story of how he came into the after school network and how he didn't understand badges, and he didn't really love school, but ultimately through badging he just experienced all these opportunities that he didn't know about, and then he got into the University of Rhode Island and is a freshman there now. So it's that idea of them using badges, and this is just a quick example, a little bit hard to read, but for everything from their debate functions that they have to arts and design, to intern type of stuff. And so really just trying to help that individual capture more of what's going on and then connect it with schools and after school. university, and so the Ahmad, he is a recent grad, brings transcripts to the job interview. I'm surprised that this means little to the employer and that there's no way to demonstrate the granular learning. So he, gets the badges and for all the skills in the university. So not just that he did calculus and psychology, and he ultimately can share these on a digital resume and give them to the employer, and it really starts to complete that whole picture of him. And this whole concept of a digital resume is definitely something that we're working on as well as a tool to kind of help the individual really build that up, in addition to LinkedIn, which I saw that question and we'll touch on at the end as well. And so a good example of this, so just to dive in deeper, I kind of teased about Purdue University, but they are definitely one of our brand champions with badges and really helping pilot that out, as well as Indiana University. They're doing a lot of research behind badges. But Purdue created a badge system. This is just an example of it. And in addition, they created a tool that teachers could use to create badges very quickly. And so this just goes to show you that how easy the design of badges could be, as you have the icons, and then you ultimately can put it together. But through this platform, so not only could the students earn badges for lab work, internships, group projects, but the teachers could ultimately create badges for different things that they wanted to incorporate into the course. And so this is just a quick quote from the Vice President of Information Technology, where he's really hitting on students learn in many ways and in a variety of settings, and really that there's so much time spent in labs, doing field work, time spent in service projects, internships, and really that their badge program, which they call their Passport app, gives interested in faculty and advisors another way to recognize and validate those skills for their students, more or less. And I will say that Purdue has seen so much success through the initial pilot program that they're actually starting to look into incorporating badges into the actual curriculum, so that that's actually something that students are working towards in addition to just getting A's and B's and so forth. Another example, open education. So everyone's, quite familiar, I'm sure now, with the concept of open ed education. And so the Cold School is just one example of a place where people can go and learn different technical skills. I will say that the field of engineering and programming is definitely a field where badges can add value, given the fact it wasn't until recently that really programming was something that was as prevalent as it is in education streams. And so a lot of times what you have is a lot of today's developers or engineers or programmers are self-taught. And even if they aren't self-taught from the initial education, there's different languages that are coming out, and there's different updates to languages that are coming out. And so ultimately, they have the ability to take courses, and Code School is just an online school, and so they have the ability to go here and take courses to learn, and so they can get badges to ultimately help build out their skill set, more or less. Another diving in is SAL, displaced worker, does not know what skills he needs, university is not an option, and so he can earn badges for the skills he already has, view badges recommended for a particular industry, so not only can he get in a sense credit for the work that he's doing on the job, but he can also find different courses or different pathways through badges that can ultimately help him round out his skill set. Manufacturing Institute uses badges to help. They are a company that ultimately uses badges to help define skills that are important to the industry, and really badges for recognizing prior learning and on-the-job training, and it ties directly into jobs. And so I really like to give this example because the badging system is pretty much twofold. And so what I mean by that is that the students can go through and ultimately earn badges for the courses and for the information that the Institute has, but also for on-the-job training, more or less. But the beauty of it too is the way the system is set up is that after you unlock one badge, there's other badges that are recommended to you. And so through the system, you ultimately help guide that student or that individual or that worker through potential pathways that they can unlock that they might not have known about, more or less. And then on the other side, it also adds value from the manufacturer's standpoint, because basically the company can say that I need this skill, this skill, this skill, and this will give me this worker. So through there, the badging system can set up so that once someone unlocks the first skill, it shows them the next skills they need in order to achieve that job, more or less. So it's just a really good way of providing the education and the structure to the individual worker, but then ultimately connecting it at the end so that that person will get a job. And a good example also of tied in with the Manufacturing Institute is a project right now called Badges for Vets. So if you think about veterans, right, they go through basic training and a good amount of them, support our country, go over to war, come back, and they're really having trouble finding jobs because a lot of their time was dedicated to really the skills that were needed on the job. So there's been a lot of efforts recently to kind of work with vets to create a badging program that ultimately can go through, they can get badges for all the skills that they learned and then connect them through jobs. And so there's a good amount of vets that are actually engaged in the Manufacturing Institute and through the Badging for Vets initiative. And it's when I talk a little bit later about one of the big initiatives we launched, this idea of really helping vets is actually something that we anticipate to grow a lot. Workforce as well. So Joelle can't find the right people, has hired the wrong person several times, wants better tools. Badges can help her search through candidates so people no longer just become a piece of paper. She ultimately can click through to see the evidence behind the badge and really start to differentiate people from other people, more or less. So again, Careers 2.0 is a good example of this. They are the site that's built off all of the data from the Stack Overflow badging system. You can go in as long as that engineer or programmer has said that they would be part of this. I could go in as an HR director, search, find Michael, and see that Michael has 20 badges based on his development skills and his work ethic as well, and then that can ultimately paint a full picture of Michael. Also badges.mozilla.org. So a big reason of why Mozilla was interested in open badges is this concept of we have a really hard time finding really good engineers and really good ultimate programmers. And so we ultimately really engage in this side as well, where ultimately can help people really find the talent they need based on badges, more or less. So then what I want to do is I just want to take a minute to walk you through, and then I have a little video in the middle of this. And I think this is important because I've talked to you about different organizations that are working with badges across different sectors. And I think it's important to paint that picture because badging isn't just meant for ultimately one sector. And so this is a good example of a big initiative that we did this past summer that shows you that the power of badges at the ecosystem level, so not just the individual organization level. And so we launched a program called the Chicago Summer of Learning. And really what it was we had one summer of 8 weeks. And the one primary focus was to address summer drop-off. And so the mayor's office had flagged that there was significant challenges with the drop-offs that happen in the spring and then in the fall. And that students, there was a huge gap in learning, and also given some of the impoverished areas of the city of Chicago, some even kids were just dropped off at the libraries, and that was considered daycare. And so they really wanted to mobilize the organizations to come up with ultimately a badging system. And so what we did was there was 5 core principles that they really wanted to hit on that were important to the initiative. So science, technology, engineering, arts, and math. And then what we helped from the technology and thought leadership is we helped them work with 3 people that kind of managed the project in Chicago, but we helped work with over 100 organizations. With each organization, we helped them come up with the badges that best represented their activities. So think the zoo, think the public libraries, think the parks and recreation, ultimately came up with a badge system that really just helped captured everything that was going there, but then also fed into a larger system. So I think the best thing is, if you wouldn't mind, we have a quick video, and I think if everybody could just take about 1 minute and 40 seconds to watch this, it's a really good description of what this actual, what the program actually did. So Michael,
That's perfect,
okay
Megan. Thank you. Everyone, as I launch this video, what you'll see is, of course, the standard YouTube screen on your frame. Depending on your system, you may have to press the play button, and for other people, it will just launch. So go ahead and adjust your speakers as this happens. Megan, remember, you won't be actually hearing anything during this, so you and I will be quiet. So let's, hopefully this is going to go. Here we go.
Great, thank you.
Chicago Summer of Learning is a citywide movement that invites young people
You're back, Megan. Go ahead.
All right. Okay. So the reason why I like to play that is I think it's just a really good, well, it's a good separation of me talking, but it's also a good way to just kind of get it from the kids' perspective of really what the ultimate program helped. And I will say that just diving through, this is just an example of some of the badges. And basically the way it was set up is that the students had the ability to go to chicagosummeroflearning.org. They could create an account. They could search for badges that they want and learn and get a little bit more transparency around what activities were going on in the summer. In addition, they had the ability to earn badges while in the field. So when at the library and so forth, they were connected with a simple claim code, more or less. We also built on the back end a system that the administrators could use to approve badges, to create badges, and so forth. And then we really started to tackle the issue of badging youth groups that are under 13. So come up with different security levels that ultimately would involve parent approval and so forth. So without getting too thick there, just wanted to say that this is a good example of really working across multiple organizations to create kind of a badge ecosystem that ultimately can have really good effects. And this is just to show you that in addition to the individual badges you could earn at the organization level, you could basically level up, or you could basically unlock other badges that would ultimately lead to the main mayor badges, which would give you some incentive. So I'm pretty sure that the incentive was you got access to the final closing summer ceremony, which the mayor was at and some other famous people were at and so forth. But so the best is over those 8 weeks, we basically touched over 23,000 learners, and we issued over 110,000 badges. And so each of those students could bring those badges back to school. They have them in their backpack. And the program was so successful, we definitely went through our initial big project kind of ebbs and flows. But overall, the project was so successful that they're looking to do it now within all of the breaks that they do, so the winter break, the fall break, and then they're also launching next year as well with a little bit more momentum and getting more organizations involved. We've also seen interest across multi-cities, so Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, San Francisco, so a lot of other cities are kind of really interested in this model as well, so we expect some more movement there. So summary, and then we'll turn it over for questions. So open badges are really digital credentials for the modern age. The key things to remember is they're evidence-based and verified, and that's ultimately really defined by the issuing organization. Really the goal is to recognize skills and achievements, so to be able to show that off. And this concept of collecting across a lifetime as your portfolio of what you know and you do. We're firm believers in Mozilla that learning doesn't stop when you leave an education environment, that learning is happening all around us. And so how do we ultimately, across your entire lifetime, be able to show that off? So it's the digital currency to carry with you across the web and share it. So not only can you collect this information, but that you as the learner have the ability to share this, whether on your profiles, whether on a digital resume, to really help unlock potentials. I wanted to touch on this because I think this is a big thing too, is that in June of this year, we were announced by Bill Clinton at the Clinton Global Initiative that he has launched a 2 Million Better Futures campaign as part of his organization. And so basically through the 2 Million Better Futures campaign, we, along with Haystack and MacArthur, which are other groups that are involved in working with us with open badges, have committed to basically helping 1 million students and 1 million workers ultimately connecting them to opportunities and bettering their lives through badges. And so we're working with different organizations, individuals, and so forth as a means to really make this happen, but really expecting, a lot of more research to come out of this, a lot of more pilot studies and so forth, but ultimately to work us through this concept of connected learning. So we have goals to do this by 2016. So with that, I just have a quick slide, and then we'll make sure we have some time for questions. And so this is just the Get Connected slide, which it sounds like Michael said he'll be sending out. But like I mentioned before, we are a very active community, so we have calls, we have Google groups. I encourage you, even if you're just dabbling and just trying to learn a little bit more, or maybe you've got more questions and you're still not really getting it, I encourage you to join some of this. Again, there's many community members there that can help answer if we can't answer, but ultimately we are here to help in any way. So with that, Michael?
Yes, thank you very much, Megan. Let's leave this slide up for a second. I don't need to show that final question slide because I think people
Great.
might want to jot down some of these things, and we will send this
Yeah,
out
wonderful.
again on Monday. You know, several things struck us in the audience as you were talking. I'll give you a little bit from the community college perspective. You're right,
Sure.
we do have a lot of initiatives for vets and a lot of interest in taking a vet who has come out of a certain arm of the service with a certain set of skills, and then somehow translating that in a way, credit for prior learning, I suppose. That also struck us because community colleges sometimes struggle how to issue credit for prior learning. I think you're right. By using a very thoughtful application of digital badges here with maybe even a centralized issuer, you could make this more straightforward for vets to demonstrate their credentials, their knowledge, their skills. So tell us again, you're working directly with some organizations, or you just see this as one of the possibilities?
Yeah, no, we are working directly, and so I also can send you some of that information. But Manufacturing Institute is one of the big organizations that we're working for, and they have vets that are going through their program. In addition, as part, there's an initiative that was started called Badges for Vets. And I'm pretty sure the last time I heard them talk, they said they had over 500 vets who had gone through. And so they're really working on connecting with certain employers to figure out what skills that they need for jobs, and then ultimately helping the vets ultimately get the badges to connect those dots. So those are some pilots that are in the process right now. Manufacturing Institute, which again I will send around as well. Manufacturing Institute is a really good example of this in action, and how they're really making the connection between more of the service-oriented type of environments and the workforce environments, and ultimately connecting them to the jobs at the end.
Very good. You know, one other question came up, and it had to do with this whole concept of using badges to evidence skills. A recent study, actually you heard me mention that Walmart Brighter Futures project. Now that it's in its second phase, in its first phase they recognize that you work with students and unemployed or dislocated workers to give them these new skills through training and education. They often struggle to convey that to employers on a resume in a job interview situation. So I really see a potential for badges here to directly address that. I think you would agree.
I do agree, and I think just very much so. I mean, we're still very young in this project, and I think getting the employer piece down is a really big focus for us. And what do I mean by that? I mean it's really starting to lock in on what employers want and what employers need. That's really going to help make that connection, because I think that's one of our ultimate goals is really how do we implement badge systems, create an ecosystem, but how do we start translating that to things like jobs, so to making sure that it's actually bettering lives for people. And so really getting in on the employer piece is definitely something that we're really starting to work on.
I think you're right. You know, Megan, let me take you forward here. Folks, I'd like to invite you to help me pay the bills, and what I mean by that is we have a very short survey while Megan and I are going through some last couple of questions. Megan, we're so perfectly on time, it's amazing. I'm going to launch the survey, everybody. Take just a moment to click on the radio buttons to give us some feedback. And Megan, while they're doing that, just a moment here, I'll launch the thing. I've got another question for you about LinkedIn.
Great.
Okay,
yes,
so
I would love to answer that question.
Just 1 second. We've got operator error here. That's me. In launching this, so just a second. See if I can't do a better job here. Just a minute. Let's try that. Okay, good. Now the survey's up. So Megan, don't touch this, you or I, while they're answering.
I will.
So let's talk about LinkedIn for a moment. Here's the story. I'm talking with a colleague at On Semiconductor here in town in Phoenix, and they don't accept resumes anymore except by LinkedIn. That's just an example. It saved them a huge amount of time, and it's just the way they do things. Now I'm imagining on my LinkedIn profile I have my digital badges. Is that happening? Have you done things in that mechanism?
Yes, it is always a really great thing, and there's two things that I want to touch on with LinkedIn. So the first is, as of our fundamental process here is that badges are open, right? And so it's this concept of you can share them everywhere. LinkedIn is a closed system, and so what they're really trying to do right now is make sure that any information that you get or have stays on LinkedIn. And so when it comes to badges, they recently launched their endorsements tool, which is getting an array of feedback, mostly just because there's no evidence behind it. So I could find, I just see there's a woman by the name of Brenda on here. I could connect with you on LinkedIn, and then I could check off that you are good at social media, PR, and medicine. And there's no real validity check there, basically. And so they're starting to get a lot of backlash with that. We've been in talks with them, and one of their officials actually sits on the Mozilla board. But right now, where those just lie is the fact that they're really trying to do something within the closed system. And so we're still working on it. There have been community ways that they pretty much, the grassroots kind of hack ways that people have been able to do in order to get their badges onto their LinkedIn profile. So we expect and hope more movement to come there. We're kind of approaching at all different levels there. So more to come as well. But I think the point that you make about people wanting to accept just LinkedIn, I think the fundamental thing there is that people are starting to understand that they want more than just a piece of paper, right? They want more than just a resume, more or less. And you know, the beauty is on LinkedIn is that if you were to go to it, you can ultimately see the connections that person has. So you know, if you can see that I am connected to more people at Mozilla and so forth. And so it's a little bit harder to make up than just what you have on a piece of paper. And so you know, we're also working on some tools. We have a resume builder that we're working on that's coming out in the beginning of the year. That's not meant to overcome LinkedIn by any means. It's just meant to kind of be a foundation to build on top of it, more or less. So I expect more movement to come there, but right now, to be honest with you, it's a little bit of a political type of decision. And so,
Right.
so we're kind of just in those barriers. But we encourage our community to tell LinkedIn that they want their badges on their profile. So that's where we're at with that topic.
Well, it's a very good point, and of course it is that unique aspect of open that you've always promoted here, which I think is important. You know, I'm going to give our participants just another 10 seconds or so to finally click on our little survey here, and then we're going to take us through our wrap-up session here. So folks, I'm going to count down. Please click those buttons to respond to our survey, submit it. I'll give you 5 more seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So let's go back here. Thank you for participating in that. Several people, as you saw, Megan, wondered if they'll be able to get access to the PowerPoints here, and you have courteously given that. We'll be sending out a link to those, and you can also visit the recording slides in the handout we'll generate through our website, but we're going to send you direct links so you don't have to fool around with that. Excuse me. Just to let folks know, Megan, on December 6th, our next webinar on this series is Autonomous Robots. I'm looking forward to that one.
Great.
And by the way, if you'd like a certificate of participation, if you email Janet, janet.pinhorn, you can see her address there. She'll look at the list and make sure you actually attended, and then she'll issue a certificate of participation to you. Oh, you mentioned Chicago, my hometown, and your initiative this summer. Well, in July of 2014, the High Impact Technology Conference really focused on technical educators collaborating with industry for the technician workforce. Megan, that happens next summer in July. So I just wanted to hype that. Here's our final question for you today, and it's sort of a it's a point of view question, and you can see some of the discussion in the chat. Let me paraphrase. Ultimately, what we need is coordination, harmonization, and articulation of a smaller number of stakeholder validated credentials. Well, that's one perspective. How might you respond to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, badges really have a lot of potential in capturing learning that is not accurately captured right now or signaled by today's credentials. And so I think You know, badging is one example, but really what the fundamental of what we're trying to do here is this concept of connected learning. And so there's clear and evident challenges with today's credentialing system. And so what we're really trying to do is to find ways to capture and ultimately better show off what's going on at the individual user level. And so badges, you know, is one way, and it's one that we will continue to explore, and through the exploration we might find other ways. But the beauty is that we have a very engaging community and members like you who join us to talk about this, who ultimately can join the momentum and help us solve this.
Perfect. That's a good wrap up. Megan, thank you again. It's a pleasure to have you on board today. All of our participants, if you like, you can click on the applause thing. It's under that smiley face there, and there's some people applauding. I can hear they liked it, Megan. Okay. Thank you again. Megan, we'll talk to you on some other things. Thank you again for being part of this. Participants, this officially ends our webinar for today, Digital Badges, Open Badges 101. Thanks for attending. Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you.
Goodbye, Megan.